huge reaction to the decision by government to allow churches to reopen from Monday. President Cyril Ramaphosa announcing that last night. Religious groups welcoming it, but it's led to other reactions. The Restaurant Association saying it's unfair. Hairdressers organisations also saying it's unfair. They seem to be off to court to ask why is it that churches are allowed to have 50 people in one building, but hairdressers and restaurants cannot open. Professor Tinyiko Maluleke is a senior research fellow at the University of Pretoria, has studied the interface between religion and politics. Professor, good afternoon to you. How much power do churches have in our society, our politics? I'd imagine they have a significant lobbying power.
I think they do. Just like the tobacco lobby and the liquor lobby, they are a powerful presence in society. But I'd like to make a distinction between churches and religion. I think the power in society is really that of religion. And churches are just one manifestation of the power of religion in society. Religion is a very powerful force in South African society. It's a very powerful force in global politics, not just in South Africa only. So from that point of view, it is indeed a very powerful presence. In this country, there was a time when the state and the church were one thing, when religion and state were completely together.
This decision by government to allow churches to reopen, it now allows all of these other groups to try and push for the same thing, to claim that they're being treated unfairly. Is this going to lead to more problems for government?
I think there is going to be problems. The challenge, Steve, is not so much that government is allowing churches to reopen. I think it is that little issue you raised earlier, the numbers, that the government is allowing 50 people to gather together at the same time. That is really the issue. The 50 people could be in a hairdressing salon. The 50 people could be in a stock fair. I think people are taking issue with that. How can you trust these people? How can you allow these 50 people to gather, and yet you can't allow other 50 people, if you like, to gather? So it's not so much for or anti-church as such. It's the principle of it, it seems to me, that people are taking issue with.
It would seem to put a lot of pressure on government. I mean, do you think that there was pressure on government because it was about religion, and because of that, this now opens the floodgates? Or do you think government could actually have said to churches, look, you're only allowed to have services of 10 people or 20 people? Do you think they would have been able to do that?
I doubt. I think there is a certain level at which the numbers become ridiculous. So if you are going to allow 10 people to be church, many churches would struggle with that number. But I think that the government has got to deal with the entire society in terms of those places that continue to be locked down. I think they have every valid reason to ask for permission to open if 50 people can be allowed to gather at churches. I don't think 30 people will make a difference or 20 people will make a difference. I think the principle of it is what people will continue to clamor for. So they'll put more and more pressure on government to make changes for them. That said, Stephen, we've got to recognize that churches, unlike the tobacco lobby and others, have generally been very quiet and very loyal and very obedient to government demands so far. So care must be taken that you don't blame the churches for what government is doing.
It's a fascinating development in terms of our society, because it really sort of gets to the heart of our society in a way. There is a deep need, a deep spiritual need for millions of people who had to give up Easter, had to give up Eid, had to give up other religious celebrations. I would imagine that government, we know that President Cyril Ramaphosa in his youth was a very religious man. I'm not aware of his faith at the moment. But all of these factors come into play in a situation like this, don't they?
They certainly do. I mean, studies have shown that what happens in COVID-19, if there is a cycles of COVID-19, as it were, is that in the first cycle, what you have is that people are are depending on medical practitioners, public health workers, and those who come to test them. But further down the line, more and more people need psychological interventions, psychiatric interventions, and maybe religious interventions come into the picture. You reach a stage in the phases or stages of being under the attack of COVID-19 where you require more and more of the non-medical, that is your strictly medical, the psychiatrist, your counseling psychologist, your therapist in psychology, as well as your priest. I think we may be moving into that stage as a country, and many countries have gone through this, Stephen.
I mean, if you go back through history, there have been many, many moments where churches have been stronger than governments. I don't mean that as a criticism. What I mean is that in terms of natural disasters, in terms of times of conflict in some places, churches have actually held societies together.
Yes, churches are not always unhelpful. I mean, of course, there are those churches where you have quacks and people who simply go rogue and do all manner of things. And one hopes that we will not see a rise of those during this time. And one hopes that churches will be responsible in the manner in which they respond to this latest concession by government. But yes, churches can be very helpful because in as much as we need medical interventions, we need the vaccine, we need the public health interventions, we also need psychological resilience as a people. We need cultural resilience. I mean, think of the funeral. The funeral is such a powerful cultural factor in South African society, certainly in black society. And that is gone, pretty much reduced to 50 people. And people have pretty much cooperated with government until now. So I think if you think of the big church in outside Polokwane, they've been very cooperative with government. And so has Bishop Makgoba of the Anglican Church and many, many other bishops. So I don't think there has been conflict, as it were, between church and government. And I think it is good if they can work together and not against one another.
Professor, if I can ask you to sort of remove your hat on the study of organized religion and politics to just straight politics for a moment. And I'm sure you're aware that there's been a set of interesting dynamics around press conferences. Now, sometimes this can be a journalistic obsession. I fully accept that. I'm a journalist and I'm easily obsessed. But we were due to get the full details around the levels, the regulations around lockdown level 3 yesterday. That was postponed to today. Then that's been postponed again. Minister Jackson Mthembu does assure us that it will be tomorrow. What does this tell us? Is there contestation behind the scenes, or does it just tell us that journalists are easily excited?
Well, there always was contestation, Stephen. We can easily assume that there is intense contestation. You will remember that this is not the first time that we have had the president or this kind of briefings being postponed. The president has hardly ever kept to the time when he has said he wants to address the nation. And you can assume that sometimes these contestations go on until close to the time when the statement needs to be issued. So clearly there are contestations behind the scenes. The problem, though, is that, and one hopes that this doesn't happen, the impression gets created that these levels are made up along the way. That, we are told there's level 2, level 3, but actually we don't know what level 3 is. We don't know what level 2 is. We will work it out when we reach there. Because if that is the situation, then it is very scary. One wouldn't want to think that they are working up, as it were, the final details of it to the extent that level 3 could be level 2 and level 2 could be level 3 and level 3 could be level 4. We need some structure, and I hope that when eventually they speak, that structure will become visible.
This is an incredibly complex set of governance problems. We have a government made up of different constituencies. We're no different from other democracies in that, perhaps. Is it inevitable that this kind of a situation would arise?
Look, I think so. If you think about it, let me go back to the point I was making earlier about stages, you know. You may be familiar with that old famous book about the stages of death. And I think the author suggested there are 5 stages through which a person goes before they die. And I think that there are stages of lockdown. You know, there's the initial stage and the second stage. I think we have now reached a stage. And this is inevitable that you go through stages, especially if you're going to have a lockdown as long as the one we have had in this country. We have reached a stage of desperation, where people are desperate to have their businesses open, where people are desperate to get some income, where people are beginning to panic about their own health and the possibilities. And some are stressed because they've seen this and that member of their family die. So we are at that stage now. So it's inevitable that you would have serious contestations at this stage of the lockdown that we have reached as a country.